Hey, so this is going to be a quick tutorial on just how to do this pretty cool little workflow to create these 3D printed little portraits using Adobe Capture from your phone, Adobe Illustrator and Fusion 360, Cura, and even some Octoprint. The first step is going to be to launch Adobe Capture, and then we'll create a new capture under Shapes. So we want to go to Shapes, create a new capture. Then we have my lovely wife here to model for us how to do this. And you can see when I come in here, I can drag this slider. And as I drag the slider, I get this green preview. The preview in green is kind of like where the vector shapes are going to be. So you want to get it just where you feel like you have just the right amount of definition. So right there looks pretty cool. Go ahead and hit capture. Oh yeah, that looks great. And so once we're happy with this preview, we'll hit next. And then you can see it drawing in all of the shapes. And these are what are going to be our vector shapes once we pull it out of here. And we'll go ahead and hit next. Save this shape as a name. We'll call this one Amber 5. Save the shape. And now this shape will be available in my Creative Cloud library that I can access from Illustrator. Okay, so we're going to go into Adobe Illustrator now, and we'll just create a new file. Call this base vector, and I'm not really going to worry about the size right now because we'll figure that out later. And so I'm just going to start with a blank document. Now, once you've used Adobe Capture, and assuming you're using Creative Cloud, it took me a little while to figure this out. Basically, you go over here into Libraries, and then you can select which library you've been saving the stuff to. So if you go to My Library, then you'll see all of the captures that you've done, all the vectors. So there's the ones that we just did, and for this, I'm going to go ahead and use this one. So you just drag it out into the canvas. Then you can do things like, rotate it here. And then if you want to maybe get rid of some of the stuff, if you double click on it, then you're kind of inside of the block or the group, and then you can just select individual shapes. So maybe I want to just select some of these to delete, and then you can kind of just double click in space and you go back out, and now this whole thing will still move as one. The other thing I want to do is probably edit the artboard. So if I come in here to File, Document Setup, I can say Edit the Artboard, and this way I can just basically set the document size to sort of fully encapsulate the image and make it look about right. And you could come in here and keep messing with this. You could go in ahead and delete some of these extra vector shapes if you wanted to or whatever. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and be happy with this. So I could save the Illustrator file, somewhere, wherever, if I wanted to. And then I could also, most importantly, now what I want to do is I want to save a copy, and I want to save out an SVG file of that shape. So we'll call this, and pretty much just take the defaults here for SVG. And now we've exported the SVG file that we can bring into Fusion. So in Fusion, I'm in a new document, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to insert an SVG file, and I'll pick a plane, and then I'm going to go and browse for that new file that I created. So I'll open that, and then this step is very important. So Illustrator exports SVG files in points, and in Illustrator there are 72 points per inch. So assuming you're using US units, you want to use 1/72 for your scale here. This will just make sure that everything stays aligned. So anything you're doing with Illustrator, if you're going from Illustrator into Fusion 360, you always want to put the scale as 1/72. And then there you go. Now you've got your shape, and we can stop the sketch if we want to rotate this around to kind of see it head on. Now I'm going to create another sketch to just be my outline. So I'll create another sketch, and again on the same plane. Notice that when I go to pick this plane, kind of get a preview, that's how you know you're sketching on the right plane. And then I'm just going to draw a rectangle, make it about roughly the size that I want. You can always scale this later. So for now, it's nice to just get it roughly the size that you want, and then we can scale the overall object later depending on what you're going to do with it, whether you're going to print it or whatever. So now I'm going to start by using press pull or extrude. So if I go create, extrude, and then I'm going to pick the rectangle first, and we will extrude this down. So I can either drag or I can type in a value. Let's go minus 0.25. Make sure you set this to be minus in this case. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I want to now cut out that vector that I had imported. So again, I'm going to say create, extrude. And in this case, the easiest way to do this is to look at this thing head on. And I'll give you another nice little tip here, which is to come into selection filters and go to selection filters, uncheck select all, and in this case we want to just select sketch profiles. That way it's not going to accidentally try to pick up anything else like faces or anything else. I'm going to say I only want to pick sketch profiles, and then we can just drag a box around everything. That's useful in lots of cases actually. And again, we'll go maybe about half the depth. Let's go minus 0.125 for the depth. And you'll see that it automatically selected cut, assumes that we want to cut into the solid geometry, and say OK. And there you go. Now we've got the cutout of that vector, which looks pretty cool. Now you can just go ahead and do a little embellishment. So maybe I'll come in, do a fillet. I'm going to grab these outer edges, or outer corners, I should say. And we can maybe make that about 1. That looks pretty good. And then the other thing I liked on here was to maybe come in and add a chamfer, smaller, maybe like 0.125. Looks pretty good. Say OK. And there you go. That's the geometry, really, everything that we need now to do that. You know, if you see here, maybe this looks like a little tight. Maybe you don't really like that. You know, you can always come back in to these previous sketches, and you can always change these values. That's one of the really nice things about Fusion actually is, so if I want to change that rectangle that defines everything, maybe I just want to make this just a little bit bigger, maybe like 7.75. It's going to change the dimension of that rectangle, and you see now that updates everything downstream, and now I've got kind of a nice little bit more of framing around it. So that's pretty much all there is to it for Fusion 360. Now if we wanted to go ahead and 3D print this, it's a nice little utility here where I can just say under make, I can say 3D print, or I can just hit this button right here. This brings up our 3D print export options. I can set the refinement. So in this case, it's got a lot of detail. I'm going to probably want a high refinement. I can preview the mesh, and then I can either send it to a 3D print utility, or I could just save an STL file here. In this case, I've got Cura installed. I've also got Print Studio or Repetier or whichever one you want to use. In this case, I'm going to send this to Cura. I'll say OK, and then you see it comes into Cura, and you can see I actually made this a little bit big for the printer that I'm going to print it on. So this is what sometimes I'll just model things whatever size in the CAD program for something like this where it doesn't really matter, and then you can just go ahead and scale it here. Or I could have scaled it back in Fusion 360. Sometimes it's nice to just do it here in the context of the bed. So if that looks good, now I'm happy with this, and the layers and everything else looks good. So once I've done this, then I can go ahead and save out the toolpath if I wanted to just take this all the way down. So we'll take this and save it out as face vector. And then I'm a big fan of Octoprint. So I use Octoprint on a little Raspberry Pi 2 to control my printer. So come back over here into Chrome, connect to my Octoprint, and go ahead and just take this all the way to completion. We'll upload the file that I just saved out. Now once you have this here in Octoprint, you can, well, first I'll connect to my printer. So I've got a little Printrbot sitting over here on the desk, connected, and then now we'll open up the G code of that face vector. And with that, I will just go ahead and hit print, and then we will wait and we will see the result. So here you can see the result. A couple things that might have changed. I might have gone in and cleaned up some of those really small, tiny little vector areas, maybe in the hair. Kind of looks cool. Maybe I would have just made them a little bit bigger. It would have been really easy to edit these things in Illustrator, but looks good.